The clinking of glasses, a symphony of laughter, and the low thrum of music painted the backdrop of the dimly lit bar. Xinian, the epicenter of the celebratory whirlwind, felt a warmth spread through her chest, a pleasant contrast to the nervousness that had been gnawing at her for weeks. Come on, let's congratulate Xinian on getting the opportunity to study abroad. Lu Yunchen raised his glass, his voice booming over the chatter. Xinian offered a shy smile, the rim of her glass cool against her lips. She took a small sip, the bittersweet taste mirroring the complex emotions churning within her. Excitement for the future warred with the bittersweet pang of leaving behind the familiar, the comfort of routine, the quiet life she had carved out for herself in Xiaocheng. A new beginning, she thought, a chance to rewrite the narrative. To new adventures, she echoed, her voice barely audible above the din. She met Lu Yunchen's gaze, the unspoken concern in his eyes a familiar comfort. He knew, perhaps better than anyone, the weight she carried, the sacrifices she had made. He had been her constant, her rock, throughout the turbulent years. He deserves someone who can fully reciprocate his feelings, a whisper of guilt echoed in her thoughts. She forced a brighter smile, hoping to dispel the shadow of her worries. The conversation flowed around her, a blend of well wishes and playful teasing. So, Xinian, one of her friends chirped, a mischievous glint in her eyes, any plans to find a handsome foreign boyfriend while you're there? The question, though light-hearted, struck a chord within her. The image of a strong jawline, piercing eyes, and a fleeting touch from 6 years ago flashed through her mind. A ghost of a memory, a forbidden yearning she had long suppressed. She quickly pushed the thought away, a familiar ache tightening in her chest. That was a lifetime ago, she reminded herself. A closed chapter. Maybe, she replied, her voice laced with a forced nonchalance that didn't quite reach her eyes. A handsome boyfriend, the thought felt foreign, almost impossible. Her life revolved around Xiaocheng, her little boy, the center of her universe. Romance seemed a distant, almost frivolous, concept. I'll find a handsome boyfriend from now on, she repeated, the words sounding hollow even to her own ears. It was a statement meant to reassure her friends, to project an image of carefree optimism. But beneath the surface, a quiet resignation lingered. She knew, deep down, that her heart was already occupied, fragmented, and scattered across the years. 6 years later, the grand ballroom of the Qingyi group shimmered under the opulent chandeliers. The annual meeting buzzed with anticipation, the air thick with the unspoken tension that always preceded Si Beiyuan's address. He stood at the podium, his presence commanding the room, his gaze sweeping over the sea of faces. He was a man sculpted from ice and steel, his aura radiating power and control. Yet, beneath the impeccable facade, a restless energy thrummed. The search had consumed him for 6 years, the memory of that fleeting encounter a persistent echo in the chambers of his heart. The woman, her laughter, the way she had looked at him, it had been a brief intersection of their lives, but it had left an indelible mark on his soul. He had to find her. His speech, though flawlessly delivered, felt like a hollow ritual. The words, carefully crafted to inspire and motivate, were meaningless compared to the burning question that haunted him. Where is she? He scanned the crowd, searching, hoping to catch a glimpse of a familiar face, a spark of recognition. His gaze landed on Xiao Ruoan, seated in the front row, her smile perfectly poised. She had been his constant companion for the past few months, a carefully constructed illusion of the woman he sought. He had almost convinced himself that it was her, that she was the missing piece of his life's puzzle. But a nagging doubt persisted, a dissonance between the memory and the reality. Something isn't right, a voice whispered in his mind. Suddenly, a small tug on his trouser leg broke his train of thought. He looked down to see a little boy, his eyes wide and curious, staring up at him with an unnerving familiarity. A flicker of something he couldn't quite decipher, a mixture of confusion and an inexplicable pull, coursed through him. "Papa?" the boy whispered, his voice barely audible above the hushed murmur of the crowd. The word, so simple yet so profound, reverberated through Si Beiyuan's being, shattering the carefully constructed walls around his heart. He knelt down, his gaze locking with the boy's, a strange sense of recognition washing over him. "Papa," the word echoed in his mind, a distant, almost forgotten melody. He had never heard anyone call him that. A ripple of commotion spread through the crowd as Qing Xinian rushed towards them, her face a mixture of panic and apprehension. "Xiao Cheng," she exclaimed, her voice laced with relief as she scooped the boy into her arms. Her eyes met Si Beiyuan's, and in that instant, time seemed to stop. The world around them faded, leaving only the two of them, locked in a silent, electrifying gaze. The memory, so vivid, so real, flooded back to him. Her laughter, her touch, the way she had looked at him, it was her. The woman he had been searching for. His wife. A wave of emotions, too complex to decipher, crashed over him. Confusion, disbelief, anger, and a strange, unfamiliar tenderness warred within him. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He could only stare at her, his mind struggling to reconcile the image he had carried for 6 years with the woman standing before him, holding his son. Qing Shinian's heart pounded in her chest, a tumultuous storm raging within her. Fear, relief, and a flicker of something akin to hope battled for dominance. She had tried to avoid this confrontation, to protect her son, to preserve the fragile peace she had built. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The silence stretched, taut and heavy with unspoken words. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, Qing Xinian spoke, the words laced with a mixture of defiance and resignation. "Si Beiyuan, this is our son, Xiao Cheng." The announcement, though quiet, reverberated through the stunned silence of the ballroom, shattering the illusion, exposing the truth, and setting in motion a chain of events that would irrevocably alter their lives. The carefully constructed facade crumbled around Xiao Rowan, her face contorted in a mixture of shock and fury. Her ambitions, her carefully laid plans, dissolved into nothingness. Lu Yunshan watched the scene unfold, his heart aching for Qing Xinian, a bittersweet understanding dawning in his eyes. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that their paths were diverging, that her future, though uncertain, was now intertwined with the man standing before her, the father of her child. The air crackled with tension, the silence pregnant with unspoken questions, the future hanging precariously in the balance. Sunlight, sharp and intrusive, sliced through the blinds of Si Beiyuan's office, painting geometric stripes across the polished mahogany desk. He tapped a long finger against the cool surface, the rhythm a counterpoint to the tension tightening his chest. 6 years. 6 years he'd been searching, the image of her face, framed by the soft glow of a Shanghai dawn, etched into his memory. He'd offered a fortune, discreetly, of course, for any information leading to her. Yet, she remained a phantom, a wisp of memory in the labyrinthine city. "Any updates, Secretary Lin?" His voice, even to his own ears, sounded strained, betraying the controlled facade he usually maintained. Lin Wei, his impeccably dressed secretary, placed a file on the desk, the faintest whisper of leather against wood. "Regarding the bracelet, Mr. C. We've traced it." The file opened, revealing a high-resolution photograph of an intricately crafted jade bracelet. It was a piece he'd only glimpsed once, a flash of green against her delicate wrist as she'd reached for a taxi. That single image had become a lifeline, the sole tangible link to the woman who had haunted his dreams. Si Beiyuan leaned closer, his gaze fixed on the photograph. The jade, a vibrant emerald, seemed to pulse with a life of its own. It was a unique piece, undoubtedly. He'd spent years searching for it, believing it to be the key to unlocking the mystery of her identity. "And?" he prompted, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in the spacious office. He felt a strange flicker of anticipation, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. Was it finally happening? Was he finally going to find her? Lin Wei adjusted his glasses, a nervous tic he exhibited when delivering important news. The bracelet was recently pawned at a small shop in the city. The owner confirmed its authenticity. A pause hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Si Beiyuan's breath hitched, a sudden tightness in his throat. Pawned? Why would she pawn something so significant? Unless a chill snaked down his spine, a premonition of something he couldn't quite grasp. The owner also provided a description of the woman who pawned it, Lin Wei continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Si Beiyuan's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. Does the description? He couldn't finish the sentence, the words caught in the sudden vice of apprehension. What if it wasn't her? What if, after all this time, it was just another dead end? It matches the information we have on the woman from 6 years ago, Lin Wei confirmed, his voice gaining a hint of confidence. Relief washed over Si Beiyuan, so potent it almost brought him to his knees. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the realization sink in. 6 years and he was finally on the verge of finding her. Mr. Si's meeting in the evening has been arranged, Lin Wei reminded him gently, breaking the spell. The annual meeting at Qingyi Group. We have to find a way to find the owner of this bracelet before then. The annual meeting. He'd almost forgotten. It was an important event, a showcase of Qingyi's continued success. But at that moment, it seemed insignificant compared to the imminent reunion with the woman who had unknowingly held his heart captive for so long. Find her, Lin Wei. Find her before tonight, Si Beiyuan commanded, his voice resonating with a newfound determination. He couldn't explain it, but he had a gut feeling that tonight was going to change everything. Lin Wei hesitated, a flicker of concern in his eyes. Mr. See, there's one more thing. The woman who pawned the bracelet, she left a contact number. He presented a slip of paper, the digits scrawled in elegant handwriting. Si Beiyuan took it, his fingers brushing against the paper, almost as if he could feel her presence through it. A strange calmness settled over him, a quiet confidence he hadn't felt before. He glanced at the number, a flicker of recognition sparking in his mind. He'd seen this number before. But where? Then it hit him. Xiaocheng's school contact information. The same elegant handwriting. Could it be? He dismissed the thought as absurd. It couldn't be her. Could it? Just then, Lin Wei's phone buzzed with an incoming message. He glanced at the screen, his eyes widening in surprise. Mr. See, he said, his voice laced with disbelief, I just got the news that she has returned to China. She's here, in the city. He looked at Si Beiyuan, a strange mixture of awe and apprehension in his eyes. Is it really fate? Si Beiyuan felt a jolt of electricity surge through him. Fate? He didn't believe in fate. But the coincidences were piling up, stacking against him like a deck of cards waiting to topple. He stared at the number in his hand, a sudden, dizzying realization taking root. He had to see her. He had to know. He dialed the number, each digit pressed with a deliberate force, the silence between the rings echoing the pounding of his heart. The phone rang, each tone a measure of anticipation, a countdown to a truth he wasn't sure he was ready to face. The click of the line connecting, a soft rustle on the other end, and then a voice, familiar yet distant, like a melody half remembered. It was her. He knew it before she even spoke. And in that moment, the carefully constructed walls he had built around his heart began to crumble, brick by agonizing brick, revealing a truth he had been unknowingly searching for 6 long years. The afternoon sun, filtered through the sheer curtains, cast long, hazy shadows across Qing Shinian's modest living room. Dust motes danced in the golden light, illuminated by the beams slicing through the gaps in the fabric. Cardboard boxes, half unpacked, littered the floor, their contents spilling out a jumble of clothes, books, and the colorful paraphernalia of a child's life. Qing Shinian, her slender frame clad in a simple white t-shirt and jeans, knelt by one such box, carefully unwrapping a framed photograph. Her fingers lingered on the glass, tracing the outline of a small, smiling boy with bright, inquisitive eyes. Xiaocheng. Her heart ached with a familiar bittersweet pang. 6 years. 6 years she had carried the weight of their secret, the truth of his parentage, a heavy stone nestled deep within her chest. Careful with that one, Anan, she murmured, her voice soft, tinged with a weariness that ran deeper than the physical exertion of moving. She glanced up at her friend, a whirlwind of energy in a bright yellow sundress, who was currently wrestling with a particularly stubborn packing tape dispenser. Don't worry, Nian Nian, Anan replied, her brow furrowed in concentration, I'm a pro at this by now. You'd think after all the times I've helped you move, I'd have earned an honorary degree in packing and unpacking sciences. She finally managed to rip a length of tape free, the sound echoing sharply in the otherwise quiet apartment. A small smile touched Qing Shinian's lips. An's boisterous energy was a welcome antidote to the quiet anxieties that gnawed at her. Anan, thank you for coming back early to help me clean up my small suite, Qing Shinian said, placing the framed photo on a nearby shelf. Each object, each piece of furniture, held a memory, a fragment of the life she had painstakingly built for herself and Xiaocheng. Why are you so polite to me? Anan scoffed playfully, taping shut a box overflowing with stuffed animals. We're practically sisters. Besides, she added, her voice softening, you know I'd do anything for you and Xiaocheng. Qing Shinian's gaze dropped to the floor, a complex mix of emotions swirling within her. Gratitude, affection, but also a deep-seated unease. An's unwavering support was a lifeline, a constant in a life that had been anything but. Yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was living a lie, a fragile facade that threatened to crumble at any moment. The encounter with Si Beiyuan at the gallery opening still reverberated through her, the intensity of his gaze, the unspoken questions in his eyes. He was searching for her, for the woman from 6 years ago, oblivious to the fact that the woman he sought stood before him, her life inextricably linked to his own. It's just, Qing Shinian began, then hesitated, unsure how to articulate the turmoil within her. How could she explain the suffocating weight of her secret, the constant fear of exposure, the complex web of emotions she harbored towards the man who was both stranger and husband, the father of her child? It's just that things are complicated, she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. She busied herself with unpacking a box of kitchen utensils, the rhythmic clinking of metal against ceramic a fragile shield against the silence that threatened to engulf her. Anan watched her, her usual effervescence tempered by a quiet understanding. She knew there were layers to Qing Shinian's story, depths she hadn't fully revealed. She'd seen the flicker of fear in Nian Nian's eyes at the gallery, the way she'd subtly withdrawn when Si Beiyuan approached. There was something more to this than just a chance encounter, Anan was sure of it. You know you can tell me anything, right? Anan said softly, placing a hand on Qing Shinian's shoulder. Whatever it is, we'll face it together. Qing Shinian met her friend's gaze, a wave of warmth washing over her. An's unwavering loyalty was a beacon in the storm, a reminder that she wasn't entirely alone. But the truth, the full weight of it, was hers alone to bear. At least for now. The thought of Xiaocheng, his innocent face, his infectious laughter, tightened the knot in her stomach. He deserved to know the truth, to have a father in his life. But revealing that truth meant shattering the fragile peace she had created, exposing herself and Xiaocheng to the unpredictable currents of Si Beiyuan's world. A world of power, wealth, and intrigue, a world she had deliberately kept at arm's length. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had built a fortress to protect her son from that world, only to find it crumbling from within. The afternoon stretched on, the apartment slowly transforming from a chaotic landscape of boxes and packing materials to a semblance of home. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, dramatic shadows across the city, Qing Xinian found herself standing by the window, gazing out at the twinkling lights. Her mind raced, replaying the events of the past few days, the unsettling encounter with Si Beiyuan, the growing realization that their paths were destined to collide. A deep sigh escaped her lips, a mixture of apprehension and a strange, flickering sense of anticipation. The future was uncertain, fraught with potential pitfalls. But for the first time in a long time, Qing Xinian felt a glimmer of hope, a fragile tendril of possibility taking root in the barren landscape of her heart. Perhaps, just perhaps, this was the beginning of something new, a chance to rewrite the past and forge a different future, a future where Xiaocheng could finally have the family he deserved. The muted hum of the city bled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Si Beiyuan's office, a low, incessant drone that mirrored the tension coiling in his gut. He stood, a stark silhouette against the cityscape, the phone pressed tight against his ear. "Are you certain?" His voice, usually a smooth baritone, was roughened with an edge of impatience. The secretary's hesitant confirmation echoed in his ear, each word a hammer blow against the wall of his carefully constructed composure. Qing Xinian was back in the country. 6 years. 6 years of searching, of a phantom image haunting the periphery of his memory, a whisper of a name brushing against the edges of his consciousness. He disconnected the call, the silence in the office suddenly amplified, pressing in on him with the weight of unspoken words, of unanswered questions. He felt a strange pull, an invisible thread tugging him towards something he couldn't quite grasp, a sense of inevitability that both intrigued and unsettled him. His fingers drummed a restless rhythm against the polished mahogany of his desk. Xinian. The name tasted like ash and regret in his mouth. He remembered her eyes, wide and luminous, the way they had looked at him with a mixture of trust and apprehension. He had been so young then, so blinded by ambition and the intoxicating allure of power. He had made a mistake, a grave one, a mistake that had cost him dearly. He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture sharp and frustrated. He had spent the last 6 years trying to atone for it, trying to find her, to explain, to apologize. And now, finally, she was within reach. "Mr. C, I have the information you requested on Ms. Cheng's current whereabouts." His secretary's voice, crisp and professional, cut through his thoughts. He turned, his expression unreadable. He took the file, his fingers brushing against the smooth paper, a strange anticipation building within him. He scanned the document, his eyes lingering on the address of her apartment, the name of her company. Chengyi Group. His own company. A bitter irony twisted in his gut. She was so close, yet so far. He was the CEO of the company she worked for, and yet, he hadn't known. Hadn't recognized her. He felt a pang of guilt, sharp and piercing. The day unfolded in a series of fragmented moments. Meetings blurred into one another, reports and presentations washing over him in a meaningless tide. His focus, his attention, was elsewhere, drawn to the image of Qing Xinian, the ghost of her presence lingering in the corners of his mind. He found himself staring out the window, his gaze fixed on the bustling streets below, searching, seeking, a part of him almost expecting to see her walking amidst the throngs of people. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the verge of something monumental, something that would irrevocably alter the course of his life. Later that afternoon, a small, intricately carved wooden box arrived at his office. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, lay a familiar bracelet, its silver surface dulled with time, the small jade pendant slightly chipped. His breath hitched. It was the bracelet he had given to Xinian all those years ago, a token of a promise he had failed to keep. "The bracelet I gave to Xinian years ago is in his hand again," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper, his fingers tracing the delicate carvings on the jade. His secretary shifted nervously. "Sir, we believe the boy who has the bracelet is MS. Cheng's son." A son. The word resonated within him, a strange mixture of shock and hope. He had a son. A son he never knew existed. He looked at the bracelet, his mind racing, trying to piece together the fragmented pieces of the puzzle. Xinian, his son, the bracelet. It all pointed to one undeniable conclusion. The woman he had been searching for, the woman who haunted his dreams, was the mother of his child. He closed his eyes, his hand tightening around the bracelet, the jade cool against his skin. "I know that incident caused some harm to you back then," he whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. "But I never meant to hurt you, Xinian." The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. All this time, he had been so close, yet so oblivious. The annual meeting of Qingyi Group. Xiao Rowan, the woman who had insinuated herself into his life, claiming to be the woman from his past, would be there. He had planned to introduce her as his partner, a gesture that now felt like a cruel mockery. He felt a surge of anger, hot and burning, directed at himself, at his own blindness, at the web of deceit that Xiao Rowan had spun around him. The image of a small boy, clutching the bracelet, flashed through his mind. His son. He knew what he had to do. He had to rectify his mistakes, to expose the truth, to claim his family. The annual meeting would not be the announcement of a false relationship, but a reunion, a revelation, a reckoning. The city lights outside his window shimmered, a kaleidoscope of colors against the darkening sky. The hum of the city no longer felt like a drone, but a symphony, a prelude to the storm that was about to break. The afternoon sunlight, filtered through the sheer curtains, cast a gentle glow on Xiaocheng's drawing. Crayons scattered across the low table painted a vibrant chaos, mirroring the burst of energy within the small boy as he hummed a tuneless melody. Xinian watched him from the kitchen, a quiet smile playing on her lips. The aroma of simmering ginger and garlic filled the air, a familiar comfort in the small apartment. 6 years. 6 years she had built this life, brick by painstaking brick. A life of quiet routines, of whispered lullabies, and the constant, unwavering presence of her son. A life far removed from the whirlwind that had swept her away and deposited her, breathless and changed, back onto solid ground. Tonight, however, a tremor ran beneath that carefully constructed foundation. Tonight, Anan was coming over. The doorbell chimed, pulling Xinian from her thoughts. Xiaocheng, with the boundless enthusiasm of a 5-year-old, scrambled to the door, yelling, "Auntie Anan." Xinian followed, her heart tapping a nervous rhythm against her ribs. Anan, her friend, her confidant, the one person who knew the fragmented pieces of her past, was about to be privy to the fragile hope of her future. Anan swept in, a whirlwind of brightly colored clothes and infectious laughter. She scooped Xiaocheng into a hug, her voice echoing through the apartment. "My little prince. Have you been behaving yourself?" Xiaocheng giggled, burying his face in her hair. Xinian watched them, the tightness in her chest easing slightly. This was her anchor. Dinner was a comfortable chaos of chatter and laughter. Xiaocheng, fueled by the excitement of An's presence, recounted his day's adventures at kindergarten with exaggerated detail. An listened patiently, punctuating his stories with dramatic gasps and exclamations. Xinian, however, found herself distracted, her gaze drifting towards the small, silver cufflinks resting on her bedside table. A gift. A silent promise. A secret she was about to share. After Xiaocheng, sticky with mango juice and thoroughly exhausted, had been tucked into bed, Xinian finally broached the subject. She fiddled with the hem of her sleeve, her gaze fixed on the swirling patterns in her teacup. "Anan," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, there's someone." Anan paused mid-sip, her eyes widening. "Someone?" she echoed, lowering her cup. The playful lilt in her voice was gone, replaced by a sharp attentiveness. Xinian knew what she was thinking. After all these years, after the heartbreak and the struggle, Xinian had finally allowed someone into her life, into their carefully constructed world. Xinian nodded, a faint blush warming her cheeks. He's different." The words felt inadequate, hollow. How could she possibly explain the complex tapestry of emotions that this man evoked in her? The unsettling familiarity, the disconcerting pull, the way her heart seemed to both quicken and still in his presence. Anan, ever perceptive, noticed the shift in Xinian's demeanor, the subtle tremor in her voice. Her gaze fell upon the silver cufflinks peeking out from Xinian's bedside table. She reached out, her fingers tracing the intricate design. "This is his?" she asked, her voice soft. Xinian's silence was confirmation enough. An's brow furrowed. "Xinian," she began, her voice laced with concern, "you know I'm happy for you, but after everything, are you sure?" Xinian took a deep breath, steeling herself. I think so. He makes me feel safe." The word hung in the air, fragile yet resolute. She knew it was more than just safety. It was a sense of belonging, of finally finding a missing piece of herself. A sudden thought struck Anan, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Wait," she stammered, her gaze darting towards the closed door of Xiaocheng's room. You have a boyfriend. Why do you have children?" The question, blunt and unexpected, hung heavy in the air. The carefully constructed walls Xinian had built around her heart seemed to crumble, exposing the raw vulnerability within. She closed her eyes, the image of Xiaocheng's sleeping face flashing before her. Her son. Her secret. Her strength. "It's complicated," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. How could she explain the whirlwind of a few stolen days, the bittersweet joy of motherhood, the agonizing years of silence? How could she explain the man who haunted her dreams, the man she both yearned for and feared, the man who was, unknowingly, the father of her child? The silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions and anxieties. The gentle hum of the refrigerator seemed to amplify the tension in the room. Finally, Anan spoke, her voice laced with a newfound understanding. "Tell me everything." Xinian hesitated, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. The weight of her secret, the burden she had carried for so long, pressed down on her. But looking into An's concerned eyes, she knew she couldn't keep it hidden any longer. Taking a shaky breath, she began to unravel the tangled threads of her past, the story of a fleeting encounter, a hidden pregnancy, and the man who was both a stranger and the missing piece of her heart. The man she now called her boyfriend. The sleek glass doors of Qingyi Group whispered shut behind Xinian, the cool air-conditioned breath of the building a stark contrast to the humid Shanghai morning. Her heels clicked softly against the polished marble floor, each tap a tiny percussion against the quiet hum of the vast reception area. Sunlight streamed through the panoramic windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, a silent ballet to the rhythm of her apprehension. Xinian, she repeated internally, the name a quiet affirmation, a shield against the wave of uncertainty that threatened to engulf her. 6 years. 6 years since she last stepped foot in this city, a lifetime ago. She clutched her portfolio tighter, the smooth leather a tangible reminder of her purpose, her reason for returning. Xiaocheng. Her son's face, bright and full of mischief, flashed before her eyes, a beacon guiding her through the labyrinth of her complicated past. Hello, everyone, I'm the new design assistant. My name is Qing Xinian. The words felt alien on her tongue, a formal introduction to a life she had once known, a life she had deliberately left behind. The design team, a mix of curious and indifferent faces, offered polite nods and murmurs of welcome. She could feel their eyes on her, assessing her, judging her. The familiar sting of vulnerability pricked at her, a sensation she had learned to suppress over the years. Don't let them see, she commanded herself, her expression carefully neutral, her gaze steady. This wasn't about her past, about him. This was about her future, about securing a stable life for her son. The days that followed blurred into a routine of sketches, revisions, and endless cups of lukewarm coffee. Qing Xinian immersed herself in the work, the familiar comfort of design a welcome distraction from the gnawing anxiety that lingered in the back of her mind. The city held too many memories, ghosts of a past she desperately tried to keep buried. Every street corner, every familiar scent, whispered his name, a constant reminder of the life she had left behind. She pushed the thoughts away, focusing on the task at hand, the clean lines and vibrant colors on her screen a temporary reprieve from the turmoil within. Then came the day she saw him. It was a fleeting glimpse, a dark silhouette against the backdrop of the CEO's office window. The familiar broad shoulders, the way he held himself, radiating an aura of power and control. It couldn't be. Could it? Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. No, it's impossible, she reasoned, dismissing the thought as a cruel trick of her memory. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was supposed to be gone. The next encounter was less fleeting, more visceral. She was presenting a new design concept to the team when the door swung open, and he walked in. Si Beiyuan. The air thickened, charged with an unspoken tension that crackled between them. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as their eyes met, his gaze sharp, inquisitive, searching hers for something he couldn't quite grasp. I'm sorry, mister. Si looks familiar. The words tumbled out of her mouth before she could stop them, a nervous tremor betraying her carefully constructed composure. Her mind raced, frantically searching for an explanation, a plausible excuse for the flicker of recognition in her eyes. Think, Xinian, think. Her palms grew damp, her breath catching in her throat. He was even more imposing than she remembered, his features sharper, his presence more commanding. The years had etched lines of weariness around his eyes, but hadn't diminished the intensity of his gaze. Si Beiyuan studied her, his expression unreadable. Have we met? His voice, deep and resonant, sent a shiver down her spine. "You don't think so," she stammered, forcing a smile that felt brittle and unnatural. "Lie convincingly, Xinian." For Xiaocheng. Her internal monologue became a desperate plea, a mantra to ward off the fear that threatened to consume her. He continued to scrutinize her, his gaze unwavering. The silence stretched, pregnant with unspoken questions, with a shared history that hung heavy in the air. Qing Xinian held his gaze, her heart pounding against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the suffocating silence. She could feel his eyes boring into her, stripping away her carefully constructed facade, layer by layer. The tension in the room was palpable, a thick, suffocating blanket. The design team shifted uneasily, their curious gazes darting between her and their CEO. Qing Xinian could feel the weight of their scrutiny, the silent questions hanging in the air. Who is this woman? What is her connection to Si Beiyuan? He finally broke the silence, a curt nod dismissing her. Continue. The word was clipped, devoid of warmth, yet she could sense a flicker of something unidentifiable in his eyes, a spark of curiosity that mirrored her own. The following days were a torturous dance of near misses and stolen glances. She would catch him watching her from across the office, his gaze intense, questioning. He would appear unexpectedly in the design department, his presence disrupting the carefully constructed equilibrium she had established. Each encounter chipped away at her resolve, the fragile wall she had built around her heart slowly crumbling under the weight of their unspoken connection. The annual meeting of Qingyi Group was a grand affair, a spectacle of wealth and power. Qing Xinian stood at the back of the ballroom, a silent observer in a sea of elegant dresses and tailored suits. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm against the backdrop of polite chatter and clinking champagne flutes. Xiao Rowan, clinging to Si Beiyuan's arm, radiated a smug satisfaction that made Qing Shinian's stomach churn. The charade was about to end. Si Beiyuan took the stage, his presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. He spoke of profits and projections, his voice smooth and confident, but his eyes kept searching the crowd, as if looking for something or someone. Qing Shinian's breath hitched in her throat. He was looking for her. Then, it happened. Xiao Cheng, escaping the watchful eye of Lu Yunshan, darted across the ballroom, his small hand reaching for Si Beiyuan. "Papa," he cried, his voice clear and bright, cutting through the hushed silence. The room erupted in a cacophony of gasps and murmurs. Si Beiyuan froze, his gaze locking onto the small figure clinging to his leg. His eyes widened, a mixture of shock and recognition. He looked up, his gaze finally settling on Qing Xinian. The truth, raw and undeniable, hung heavy in the air between them. 6 years ago, Si Beiyuan began, his voice echoing through the stunned silence, "I met a woman. A woman who changed my life. A woman I never stopped searching for." His gaze never left Qing Shinian's. "Today, I finally found her." The Qingyi Group annual meeting shimmered with an almost feverish energy. Crystal chandeliers cast a kaleidoscopic rain of light across the polished marble floor, reflecting in the champagne flutes held by elegantly dressed guests. Si Beiyuan stood amidst the throng, a detached observer in his own domain. His gaze scanned the crowd, a restless flicker in his usually impassive eyes. He was searching. Searching for a phantom from 6 years past, a woman whose face haunted his memories, a woman he was convinced held the key to a piece of himself he couldn't quite grasp. He hadn't even realized how deeply this search had embedded itself within him until Xiao Rowan, clinging to his arm with a practiced smile, had murmured, "Looking for someone, Beiyuan?" He had offered a curt shake of his head, a dismissive gesture that belied the churning unease in his gut. Xiao Rowan's touch felt alien, her perfume cloying. "She isn't her," a voice whispered in the back of his mind. Across the ballroom, Qing Xinian watched the scene unfold, a strange tightness in her chest. She had seen the way Si Beiyuan's eyes had raked the crowd, the subtle tension in his jaw. He's still looking, she thought, a bittersweet ache blooming in her heart. 6 years. 6 years of silence, of building a life for herself and their son, a life deliberately kept separate from the shadow of Si Beiyuan's immense power. She clutched Xiaocheng's hand a little tighter, the warmth of his small fingers a tangible anchor in the swirling uncertainty of the evening. Lu Yunshan, standing beside her, noticed the shift in her demeanor. "Are you all right, Xinian?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. "Just a little overwhelmed," she replied, forcing a smile. The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. She couldn't tell Lu Yunshan the truth, not yet. The weight of it felt too heavy, too fragile to share. Xiaocheng, oblivious to the complex currents of emotion swirling around him, tugged at his mother's hand. "Mommy, look. That man looks like the prince from my storybook." His childish voice, clear and bright, cut through the murmur of the crowd. Qing Shinian followed his gaze, her breath catching in her throat. Si Beiyuan. He was standing near the stage, the spotlight catching the sharp angles of his face, giving him an almost ethereal glow. He does look like a prince, she thought, a strange mix of pride and sorrow washing over her. She hadn't realized how much Xiaocheng resembled his father until this moment. The same dark, intense eyes, the same proud tilt of the chin. It was a resemblance that both thrilled and terrified her. Drawn by an invisible thread, Xiaocheng wriggled free of his mother's grasp and darted toward Si Beiyuan. Qing Shinian's heart leaped into her throat. Xiaocheng, she whispered, reaching out, but it was too late. The boy had already reached Si Beiyuan, his small hand tugging at the fabric of his expensive suit. Si Beiyuan looked down, a flicker of surprise crossing his features. He wasn't used to being approached so boldly, especially by a child. "Excuse me, little one," he said, his voice softer than anyone in the room had ever heard it. Xiaocheng tilted his head back, his dark eyes wide with innocent curiosity. "Mommy, is this my daddy?" The question hung in the air, a fragile bubble of truth amidst the glittering facade of the event. The music seemed to fade, the conversations around them dimming to a low hum. All eyes turned towards them, drawn to the raw, unscripted drama unfolding in the center of the ballroom. Qing Shinian felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. She wanted to run, to disappear, to take Xiaocheng and escape the suffocating weight of the moment. But her feet felt rooted to the spot, her body frozen in place. Si Beiyuan stared at the child, his mind reeling. "My daddy." The words echoed in his ears, a strange dissonance against the backdrop of his carefully constructed life. He looked at Xiaocheng, really looked at him, and a jolt of recognition shot through him. The eyes. Those dark, intelligent eyes. "This kid's eyes seem to be somewhat similar to mine," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. A strange, unfamiliar feeling tugged at his heartstrings. He knelt down, his gaze level with Xiaocheng's. "What's your name, little one?" "Xiaocheng," the boy replied, his voice filled with a trust that both warmed and unsettled Si Beiyuan. He reached out, his hand hovering hesitantly over Xiaocheng's head. He wanted to touch him, to feel the soft silk of his hair, to forge a connection he didn't understand. But something held him back, a cautious reserve that was as much a part of him as his ambition and drive. Qing Shinian, unable to bear the silence any longer, walked towards them, her steps measured and slow. Every eye in the room followed her progress, the air thick with anticipation. "Xiaocheng," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "it's time to go." She reached out to take her son's hand, but he resisted, his small fingers tightening around Si Beiyuan's. "No, Mommy," he said, his voice firm. "I want to stay with Daddy." The word "Daddy" pierced through Si Beiyuan's carefully constructed defenses like a shard of glass. He looked up at Qing Shinian, his gaze searching, questioning. And in that moment, recognition dawned. The curve of her jaw, the tilt of her head, the way her eyes held a mixture of vulnerability and strength. It was her. The woman from his memories, the ghost he had been chasing for 6 long years. The air crackled with unspoken words, with the weight of a shared past that had been buried but never forgotten. The carefully orchestrated facade of the evening crumbled around them, revealing the raw, messy truth of their intertwined lives. He stood, pulling Xiaocheng closer, his gaze locked on Qing Shinian. The announcement he had planned, the carefully crafted words of corporate success, faded into insignificance. There was a different story to tell, a story that began 6 years ago and was only now, in this charged, unexpected moment, beginning to unfold. He turned to the microphone, the hushed silence of the ballroom amplifying his voice. "I have an announcement to make," he began, his voice resonating with a newfound authority, an authority that stemmed not from his corporate power, but from the small hand clasped tightly in his own. He looked at Qing Shinian, his eyes filled with a complex mix of emotion: surprise, confusion, and a flicker of something that looked a lot like hope. The game had changed. Xiao Ruoan's carefully constructed lies were about to unravel, and the truth, as sharp and unpredictable as a shattered mirror, was about to be revealed. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and the distant hum of the city. Qing Shinian watched Xiaocheng chase pigeons in the park, a faint smile playing on her lips. His carefree laughter was a melody against the backdrop of her anxieties. Si Beiyuan's persistent presence, Xiao Ruoan's blatant lies, it all felt like a tangled web tightening around her. How much longer can I keep this up? She wondered, a knot forming in her stomach. Each encounter with Si Beiyuan was like walking a tightrope, the fear of exposure a constant companion. Her phone buzzed, a message from Lu Yunshan. Lunch at the usual place. She typed back a quick affirmation, a wave of warmth washing over her at the thought of his steady presence. He was her anchor in this storm, her confidant, the one person who knew the truth. He's the only one I can truly rely on, she mused, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Later, at the restaurant, the aroma of spices hung heavy in the air. Lu Yunshan watched her push the food around her plate, her usual vibrant energy replaced by a quiet apprehension. He contacted you again, he asked, his voice laced with concern. She nodded, her gaze fixed on the swirling patterns in her teacup. He keeps asking about the past. About that night. A shiver ran down her spine, the memory still vivid, raw. 6 years. I thought I'd buried it deep enough. What did you tell him? Lu Yunshan's hand covered hers, his touch grounding. She looked up, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. Nothing. I deflected. He thinks Xiao Ruoan is the woman he's looking for. The words tasted like ash in her mouth. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. He's searching for me, yet he doesn't even know I exist. This charade can't go on forever, Shinian. Lu Yunshan's voice was low, urgent. The truth will come out eventually. It always does. His words echoed her own fears, amplifying the sense of impending doom. She knew he was right, but the thought of confronting Si Beiyuan, of revealing Xiaocheng's existence, paralyzed her. What if he rejects him? What if he takes him away from me? Across town, in the sleek, glass-walled office of Qingyi Group, Si Beiyuan stared at the photograph on his desk. A grainy image of a woman's back, captured 6 years ago. It has to be her. He'd been searching for her relentlessly, driven by a force he couldn't quite comprehend. Xiao Ruoan's appearance had initially seemed like a stroke of luck, but something felt off. Her story was riddled with inconsistencies, her demeanor too eager, too calculated. A flicker of suspicion ignited within him, a cold, hard knot in his gut. Something isn't right. He picked up his phone, dialing his assistant. Get me everything you can find on Xiao Ruoan. Everything. He hung up, his gaze returning to the photograph. The woman's silhouette, shrouded in mystery, held a strange power over him. Who are you? He silently asked, a strange longing echoing in the cavernous silence of his office. The Qingyi Group annual meeting was a spectacle of flashing cameras and hushed whispers. Xiao Ruoan, draped in diamonds and a designer gown, clung to Si Beiyuan's arm, a triumphant smile plastered on her face. Qing Shinian watched from the sidelines, her heart pounding against her ribs. She had to tell him. She had to stop this charade before it went any further. But how? The question reverberated in her mind, each beat of her heart a drumbeat of anxiety. Suddenly, Xiaocheng, who had been playing nearby, broke free from Lu Yunshan's grasp and ran toward Si Beiyuan, his small hand reaching out. "Papa," he called out, his voice clear and bright. The room fell silent. All eyes turned towards the child, then to Si Beiyuan, whose face was a mask of stunned disbelief. Xiao Ruoan's carefully constructed facade crumbled, her eyes widening in panic. Qing Shenian's breath hitched. "It's happening. It's all happening." She closed her eyes, bracing for the inevitable explosion. "Papa?" Si Beiyuan echoed, his voice barely a whisper. He looked down at Xiaocheng, then at Qing Shenian, a storm brewing in his eyes. Xiao Ruoan stammered, "Beiyuan, I can explain, it's not what it looks like." He ignored her, his gaze fixed on Qing Shenian. How does he know that I have a child?" His voice was low, dangerous. Qing Shenian stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked at Xiaocheng, his innocent face turned up to Si Beiyuan's, then back at the man who was both stranger and husband. "He's your son," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "Our son." Xiao Ruoan, desperate to salvage the situation, pointed a manicured finger at a small toy car clutched in Xiaocheng's hand. This is my boyfriend's thing." He must have seen it and assumed. Her words trailed off under Si Beiyuan's icy stare. He looked at the toy, then back at Xiaocheng, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. The same car. The one he'd bought on a whim 6 years ago, a silent promise to the woman he'd lost. The pieces clicked into place, the truth shattering the illusion he'd clung to. He turned to Xiao Ruoan, his voice cold and hard. "Get out." He didn't need any more explanations. The truth was stark, undeniable. He looked at Qing Shenian, his eyes searching hers, a mixture of anger, confusion, and a strange, nascent hope flickering within their depths. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken words and the weight of 6 lost years. The annual meeting, the whispers, the flashing cameras, all faded into the background. The only thing that mattered was the woman standing before him, the woman he'd searched for, the mother of his son. The woman who was, unknowingly, his wife. The crystal chandeliers of the ballroom cast a shimmering glow, reflecting off the polished marble floors and the expectant faces of Qingyi Group's elite. Si Beiyuan stood on the stage, his presence commanding the silence of the room. The microphone felt cold in his hand, a stark contrast to the burning anticipation that coiled in his gut. 6 years. 6 years he had searched for the phantom of a memory, a woman whose face haunted his dreams and whose touch lingered like a ghost. Tonight, he believed, the search would end. Tonight, he would finally unveil the woman who held the key to a piece of his soul he hadn't known was missing. His gaze swept across the sea of faces, each one a blur of anticipation, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath his carefully composed exterior. Qing Shenian sat at the back, the opulent surroundings a stark contrast to the quiet life she had built for herself and Xiaocheng. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a gilded cage. Lu Yunshan sat beside her, his presence a small comfort in the overwhelming atmosphere. She clutched her purse, the worn leather a tangible reminder of the life she had meticulously crafted, a life now teetering on the precipice of upheaval. Seeing Si Beiyuan on stage, so powerful, so untouchable, a wave of conflicting emotions washed over her. Pride, fear, resentment, and a flicker of something else she dared not name. She watched Xiaocheng, mesmerized by the glittering lights, his small hand clutching hers. He didn't understand the significance of this night, the weight it held, the potential to shatter the fragile world they inhabited. On stage, Si Beiyuan cleared his throat, the amplified sound echoing through the silent hall. Tonight, he began, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through Qing Shenian, marks a significant milestone for Qingyi. But it also marks a personal milestone for me. He paused, letting the words hang in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. Qing Shinian's breath hitched. She knew, with a chilling certainty, what was coming. Her fingers tightened around Xiaocheng's, the small pressure grounding her in the swirling vortex of her anxiety. She couldn't look away, couldn't escape the magnetic pull of the man who, unknowingly, held her destiny in his hands. Beside Si Beiyuan, Xiao Ruoan stood bathed in the spotlight, a triumphant smile playing on her lips. She allowed her gaze to linger on Si Beiyuan, a possessive glint in her eyes. Tonight, her carefully constructed facade would solidify into reality. She had played the part perfectly, weaving a tapestry of lies so intricate, so believable, that even Si Beiyuan, with all his power and intelligence, had been ensnared. The thrill of victory coursed through her veins, a heady rush of power and anticipated wealth. For 6 years, Si Beiyuan continued, his voice resonating with an undercurrent of emotion that sent a shiver down Qing Shinian's spine. I have searched for a woman. A woman who, he hesitated, searching for the words to describe the inexplicable connection, the phantom limb sensation of a missing piece of himself. A woman who changed my life without even knowing it. Xiaocheng, oblivious to the tension crackling in the air, tugged on Qing Shinian's sleeve. "Mommy," he whispered, his voice full of innocent curiosity, "is that Daddy?" Qing Shinian froze, her blood turning to ice. She hadn't prepared for this, hadn't anticipated this moment of childish intuition. How could she explain the complicated web of their past, the tangled threads of fate that had woven their lives together yet kept them apart? "No, sweetheart," she murmured, her voice barely audible above the pounding of her heart. "That's Mr. C." On stage, Si Beiyuan finally turned, his gaze settling on Xiao Ruoan. He extended his hand, a gesture of invitation, of possession. "Tonight," he announced, his voice ringing with finality, "I would like to introduce you to the woman I have been searching for. My wife." The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken promises and a future Qing Shinian knew was built on a foundation of lies. Xiao Ruoan stepped forward, basking in the spotlight, her smile radiant, almost blinding. She reached for his hand, her fingers brushing against his. Triumph surged through her. It was done. She had won. Then, a small voice, clear and unwavering, cut through the stunned silence. "No." Every head turned towards the source of the interruption. Xiaocheng stood, his small frame radiating an unexpected strength. He pointed towards the back of the room, his finger unwavering. "Mommy is Daddy's wife." The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the sharp intake of breaths. All eyes followed Xiaocheng's finger, settling on Qing Shinian, her face pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and resignation. Si Beiyuan's gaze locked onto Qing Shinian, a jolt of recognition, of familiarity, coursing through him. The phantom memory solidified, the blurry edges sharpening into the clear image of the woman before him. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic rhythm echoing the turbulent emotions swirling within him. It couldn't be. Could it? Time seemed to stretch, to distort, as Si Beiyuan descended from the stage, his eyes never leaving Qing Shinian's. He moved with a predatory grace, the crowd parting before him like water before a ship's prow. He stopped before her, his gaze searching, questioning. He looked at Xiaocheng, then back at Qing Shinian, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with a sickening certainty. "My wife," he said, his voice low and husky, the words echoing the truth that had been hidden for so long. "It's Qing Shinian." He reached out, his hand hovering over hers, hesitant yet yearning. Qing Shinian met his gaze, her heart a battlefield of conflicting emotions. She could no longer hide, no longer pretend. The truth was out, stark and undeniable. The spotlight shifted, illuminating Xiao Ruoan's shocked, disbelieving face. The carefully constructed mask of composure cracked, revealing the raw fear and desperation beneath. The whispers started, rippling through the crowd, a wave of speculation and judgment. Si Beiyuan turned to Xiao Rowan, his eyes cold and hard, the gentleness from moments before replaced by a glacial fury. "Xiao Rowan," he said, his voice cutting through the murmuring crowd, each word a shard of ice, "do you have anything to say?" The sterile scent of antiseptic hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the tempest brewing inside Qing Xinian. Her head throbbed, a dull, insistent pulse against her temples, mirroring the frantic beat of her heart. The linoleum floor seemed to sway beneath her feet, the white walls blurring at the edges. She pressed a hand to her forehead, trying to anchor herself, to quell the rising tide of nausea. These past few days had been a whirlwind, a chaotic dance of fear and uncertainty, and her body, it seemed, had finally decided to rebel. Just a few hours ago, Xiao Rowan's venomous accusations had echoed in the opulent ballroom, each word a poisoned dart aimed at her heart. The humiliation, the sheer injustice of it all, had threatened to suffocate her. And then, Si Beiyuan's eyes, those dark, inscrutable pools, had fixed on her, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. Doubt? Recognition? The question hung in the air, a heavy weight pressing down on her chest. She hadn't dared to breathe, hadn't dared to hope. 6 years. 6 years of silence, of carefully constructed walls around her heart, and now, it all threatened to crumble. She had fled, escaping the suffocating gaze, the unspoken questions, seeking refuge in the sterile quiet of the hospital. A small hand slipped into hers, warm and reassuring. "Mommy, are you okay?" Xiao Cheng's voice, small and worried, pierced through the fog in her mind. She looked down at him, his innocent eyes wide with concern, and a wave of guilt washed over her. He shouldn't have to see her like this, weak and vulnerable. She forced a smile, a pale imitation of the genuine warmth she usually felt for him. "Mommy's just a little tired, sweetheart." The words felt hollow even to her own ears. She squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his small, unwavering presence. He was her anchor, her reason for enduring, for fighting. For him, she had to be strong. A blur of white coats and hushed whispers filled the periphery of her vision. The room seemed to tilt, and the last thing she registered was Xiao Cheng's terrified cry before darkness claimed her. "Mommy has fainted." Xiao Cheng's voice, sharp with panic, cut through the hushed murmurs of the hospital waiting room. He clung to Lu Yunshen's hand, his small body trembling. Lu Yunshen felt a pang of sympathy for the little boy. He had always admired Qing Shinian's strength, her quiet resilience. Seeing her collapse had been a shock, a stark reminder of the burden she carried. He knelt down, meeting Xiao Cheng's gaze. "Don't worry, Xiao Cheng. The doctors are taking care of your mommy. She'll be all right." The words were meant to reassure the child, but they also served to steady his own racing heart. He had always harbored a silent affection for Xinian, a quiet admiration that had blossomed during their years abroad. He had watched her struggle, watched her build a life for herself and her son, and his respect for her had only deepened. He knew the weight of her secrets, the constant fear of discovery, and he ached to protect her, to shield her from the storm that was gathering on the horizon. A figure materialized beside them, tall and imposing, casting a long shadow over the waiting room. Si Beiyuan. His face was a mask of controlled concern, his jaw tight, his eyes dark and unreadable. Xiao Cheng, despite his distress, seemed to recognize something familiar in the man's presence. He tugged on Lu Yunshen's hand, his voice small but clear. "Uncle Si and Uncle Lu are both here." The simple statement, the innocent observation, hung in the air, charged with unspoken meaning. Lu Yunshen felt a knot tighten in his stomach. The situation was far more complicated than the child could comprehend. He glanced at Si Beiyuan, searching for a reaction, but the man's expression remained impassive. Si Beiyuan's mind raced, a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. Seeing Qing Xinian collapse, so pale and fragile, had unleashed a torrent of protectiveness he hadn't known he possessed. He had searched for her relentlessly for 6 years, driven by a need he couldn't fully comprehend. And now, here she was, vulnerable and in need of his help, and a strange, unsettling feeling tugged at his heart. The child's words, Uncle Si, echoed in his mind. He looked at Xiaocheng, at the small hand clutching Lu Yunqian's, and a flicker of recognition, of something deeply buried, stirred within him. The boy's eyes, so like Shernyan's, held a spark of familiarity, a connection that resonated deep within his soul. He pushed the thought aside, dismissing it as absurd. Yet, the seed of doubt had been planted. Hours crawled by, each tick of the clock an eternity. The sterile silence of the waiting room was broken only by the hushed whispers of nurses and the occasional muffled sob from Xiaocheng, exhausted from worry. Lu Yunqian tried to comfort the boy, offering him juice and quiet words of reassurance, but his own thoughts were a tangled mess. He knew he should step back, should leave Si Beiyuan to deal with this, but something held him there, a sense of responsibility, a need to protect Xinian, even in her unconscious state. He watched Si Beiyuan, the man's usual icy composure replaced by a restless energy, pacing the length of the waiting room like a caged predator. He had seen that look before, the driven, almost obsessive focus, in the boardroom, in negotiations, but never tinged with this underlying vulnerability. Finally, a doctor emerged, his face etched with fatigue. She's stable now. Exhaustion and stress. She needs rest. The words were simple, yet they carried a weight of unspoken implications. Si Beiyuan stepped forward, his voice low and urgent. Can I see her? The doctor hesitated, then nodded. Just for a few minutes. Si Beiyuan entered the room, his heart pounding against his ribs. Qing Xinian lay on the bed, her face pale against the stark white pillow, her breathing shallow and even. He sat beside her, his gaze fixed on her face, tracing the delicate curve of her cheekbone, the faint shadows beneath her eyes. He reached out, his hand hovering just above hers, then pulled back, as if afraid to break the fragile peace. He had so many questions, so many things he needed to understand. Who was this woman who had haunted his dreams for 6 years? What secrets did she hold? And why did the sight of her, so vulnerable and still, evoke such a fierce, protective instinct within him? He leaned closer, his breath warm against her skin, and whispered, I'll find out the truth, Xinian. I promise. The truth, however, was already unfolding, whispered in hushed tones in the corridors of Qingyi Group. Xiao Ruoan's web of lies was unraveling, thread by thread, exposed by the very evidence she had planted. And in the quiet stillness of the hospital room, a family unknowingly reunited, awaited the dawn of a new beginning. The hush that fell over the Qingyi Group's annual meeting was thick enough to choke on. Si Beiyuan stood on the stage, the microphone clutched loosely in his hand, the spotlight a harsh halo around him. His gaze, usually sharp and incisive, now held a bewildering softness as it rested on the small figure beside him. Xiaocheng, oblivious to the weight of the moment, fidgeted with the hem of his oversized suit jacket, a miniature replica of the one his father wore. Beiyuan felt a strange tug in his chest, a tightening he hadn't experienced before. This child, this small, vulnerable being, was his. His son. The realization resonated deep within him, a seismic shift in the landscape of his life. He had searched relentlessly for the woman from 6 years ago, the woman who had haunted his dreams and fueled his obsession, never knowing she was right here, woven into the fabric of his existence. Just a few moments ago, Xiao Ruoan, her face contorted with disbelief and fury, had been escorted from the stage. Her carefully constructed facade, her elaborate lies, had crumbled under the weight of truth. Baiyuan's jaw tightened at the memory. He'd been a fool, blinded by a manufactured resemblance, a carefully orchestrated performance. His gut had twisted with unease when he first saw her, a dissonance he dismissed as the passage of time. How could he have been so easily deceived? The question burned, a bitter taste in his mouth. He glanced at Qing Shinian, who stood slightly behind Xiaocheng, her posture rigid, her face pale. He saw the flicker of fear in her eyes, the subtle trembling of her hands. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that she had carried this burden alone, the weight of their shared secret, the truth of their son. He felt a pang of guilt, sharp and piercing. He owed her an apology, an explanation, a lifetime of understanding. He cleared his throat, the sound amplified in the silent hall. "There has been a misunderstanding," he began, his voice low and steady, each word carefully chosen. The silence in the room intensified, every eye fixed on him, waiting. "The woman I have been searching for, the woman who," he paused, his gaze meeting Qing Shinian's across the stage, "the woman who is the mother of my son, is not MS. Xiao." He could almost feel the collective intake of breath from the audience. He took a step closer to Shinian and Xiaocheng, extending a hand towards them. His heart pounded against his ribs, a frantic rhythm against the backdrop of the silent room. Qing Shinian's mind raced. 6 years. 6 years of silence, of carefully guarded secrets, of a life built on the fragile foundation of independence. Now, in front of hundreds of scrutinizing eyes, her carefully constructed world threatened to collapse. She looked at Baiyuan, his hand outstretched, his expression unreadable. A whirlwind of emotions raged within her: fear, uncertainty, a flicker of hope she hadn't dared to acknowledge. Could she trust him? Could she risk opening her heart, exposing her vulnerability, after all this time? Xiaocheng, sensing her hesitation, tugged on her hand, his innocent eyes questioning. "Mommy," he whispered, his small voice barely audible above the pounding of her heart. It was his voice, his unwavering trust, that gave her the strength she needed. She took a deep breath, her hand trembling slightly as she placed it in Baiyuan's. His fingers closed around hers, warm and firm, a tangible connection that spanned the chasm of their separation. Lu Yunshan watched from the sidelines, his heart aching with a quiet resignation. He had always known his love for Shinian was a silent, unrequited devotion. He saw the unspoken connection between her and Baiyuan, the invisible thread that bound them together, a bond he could never break. He swallowed the bitter taste of disappointment, reminding himself that her happiness was all that mattered. He offered her a small, encouraging smile, a silent promise of support. He would be there for her, always, even if it meant standing in the shadows. Baiyuan's grip tightened on Shinian's hand, grounding her in the tumultuous storm of the moment. He looked at the sea of faces before him, the expectant gazes, the whispered speculations. "This," he declared, his voice resonating with newfound authority, "is Qing Shinian. My wife." He paused, letting the words sink in. He then looked down at Xiaocheng, a gentle smile gracing his lips. "And this is Xiaocheng. My son." The silence in the room cracked, replaced by a wave of murmurs, gasps, and the frantic click of cameras. Xiaocheng, oblivious to the implications of his father's words, looked up at Baiyuan with wide, curious eyes. "Wife," he repeated, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Like mommy?" Baiyuan chuckled, a genuine, heartfelt sound that surprised even himself. He knelt down, his gaze level with his son's. "Yes, like mommy," he confirmed, his voice soft and reassuring. "Mommy is my wife, and we are a family." The words hung in the air, heavy with significance. They were a declaration, a promise, a new beginning. Baiyuan stood up, his hands still intertwined with Shernyan's, a silent vow passing between them. He turned to the audience, his gaze sweeping across the room, his voice clear and unwavering. From now on, he announced, each word imbued with the weight of his position, the power of his commitment, you have a CEO's wife named Qing Xinian, and a young master named Xiaocheng. The room erupted in applause, a cacophony of sound that echoed the seismic shift in Qingyi Group's landscape, a shift that mirrored the profound transformation within its CEO's heart. He looked at Xinian, her eyes shining with unshed tears, a fragile smile playing on her lips. He knew this was just the beginning of their journey, a journey fraught with challenges, with unspoken hurts, with the long shadow of their past. But as he looked at her, at their son, at the family they had unwittingly created, he felt a surge of hope, a quiet certainty that together, they could face anything. The future, once a bleak and uncertain expanse, now held the promise of something beautiful, something real. Sunlight, filtered through the sheer curtains, painted stripes across the wooden floor of their small living room. Qing Xinian watched Xiaocheng meticulously arrange his toy cars, a small furrow in his brow as he lined them up by size. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, the faint chirping of birds outside, these everyday sounds were a comfort, a constant reminder of the fragile peace she had built for them. 6 years. 6 years of quiet strength, of carving out a life far from the shadows of her past. Yet, the past, like a persistent ghost, had found its way back. Si Baiyuan. The name echoed in the quiet corners of her mind, each syllable a shard of memory, sharp and bittersweet. He was here, in her city, searching for her, for the woman from 6 years ago. She knew he wouldn't recognize her. He wouldn't recognize the shy, hesitant girl and the confident, independent woman she had become. And he certainly wouldn't recognize their son. Xiaocheng, oblivious to the turmoil in his mother's heart, looked up, his bright eyes meeting hers. "Mama, when is Uncle C coming back?" He picked up a small, red car, clutching it tightly in his hand. The innocence in his voice, the unquestioning affection he held for Si Baiyuan, twisted a knot in her stomach. How could she tell him? How could she explain the complex web of their past, the unspoken truths that bound them together? "Soon, Bao Bei," she replied, forcing a smile. The words felt heavy, laden with a meaning she couldn't yet share. She ran a hand through his soft hair, the familiar gesture a silent promise to protect him, to shield him from the storm that was brewing. The doorbell rang, slicing through the quiet. Qing Shernyan's breath hitched. It was him. She could feel it. A strange mixture of apprehension and anticipation coiled in her chest. Xiaocheng, with a whoop of delight, scrambled to his feet, racing towards the door. "Uncle C," he shouted, his voice filled with uncontained joy. Si Baiyuan stood at the threshold, a bouquet of lilies in his hand, their stark white a stark contrast to the darkness in his eyes. He looked tired, the lines around his mouth deeper than she remembered. The sight of him, standing there in her doorway, sent a wave of conflicting emotions crashing over her. Resentment, longing, fear, they swirled within her, a tempestuous sea threatening to overwhelm her carefully constructed composure. He looked past Xiaocheng, his gaze searching, questioning. "Xinian," he murmured, the name a hesitant whisper on his lips. He didn't recognize her. The realization, though expected, still stung. She offered a polite, distant smile. "Mr. C, please come in." Xiaocheng tugged at Si Baiyuan's hand, pulling him into the living room. "Look, Duodi," he said, pointing to his meticulously arranged cars, "I saved the red one for you." Si Baiyuan's gaze softened as he looked at Xiaocheng, a flicker of warmth in his eyes. He ruffled the boy's hair. That's very thoughtful of you, Xiaocheng. The word duodi, a childish pronunciation of daddy, hung in the air, unnoticed by Si Beiyuan, but it struck Qing Xinian like a physical blow. Her heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. This charade, this pretense of normalcy, couldn't last. The truth, like a tightly wound spring, was about to unravel. Later that evening, the annual meeting of Qingyi Group was in full swing. The grand ballroom buzzed with conversation, the clinking of champagne flutes a constant undercurrent to the murmur of voices. Xiao Ruoan, dressed in a shimmering gown, stood beside Si Beiyuan, basking in the attention. She smiled, a practiced, dazzling smile, as she greeted the guests, her eyes gleaming with triumph. She had played her cards right. She had convinced Si Beiyuan that she was the woman he had been searching for. Soon, she would be Mrs. Si Beiyuan, the wife of one of the most powerful men in the city. Si Beiyuan, however, felt a growing unease. Xiao Ruoan's story, though plausible, didn't quite fit. There was a discrepancy, a missing piece that nagged at him. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Suddenly, a small figure darted onto the stage, weaving through the startled guests. It was Xiaocheng. He ran straight to Si Beiyuan, his small hand clutching his father's suit jacket. He looked up at Si Beiyuan, his eyes wide and earnest. "Daddy," he said, his voice clear and loud, cutting through the sudden hush that had fallen over the room, "Uncle Si is my duodi." The words, so innocent, so pure, detonated in the silence like a bomb. Every head turned towards them, every conversation ceased. Xiao Ruoan's carefully constructed facade crumbled. Her face paled, her smile faltering. Si Beiyuan stared down at Xiaocheng, his mind reeling. Duodi. Daddy. He looked at Qing Xinian, who stood at the edge of the stage, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. The pieces clicked into place. The resemblance between Xiaocheng and himself, the familiarity in Qing Xinian's eyes, the quiet strength she possessed, it all made sense now. He had been searching for her all this time, and she had been right there, raising their son. He knelt down, his gaze locking with Xiaocheng's. "Is that true, Xiaocheng?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Xiaocheng nodded, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Mama said I can't call you daddy in public, but you are my duodi." A wave of emotion washed over Si Beiyuan, so powerful it almost knocked him off his feet. Relief, regret, love, they surged through him, a torrent of feeling he had never experienced before. He reached out, pulling Xiaocheng into a tight embrace. He stood up, holding Xiaocheng's hand, and turned to face the stunned audience. He looked at Xiao Ruoan, his gaze cold and hard. Then, he looked at Qing Xinian, his eyes filled with a depth of emotion that made her breath catch in her throat. He took a deep breath, and in a voice that resonated with authority and conviction, he said, "I would like to introduce you to my wife, Qing Xinian, and our son, Si Xiaocheng."